Hello and welcome to this video from Dynamic Yield by MasterCard. Today, we're diving into our recent research report, The State of Personalization Maturity in Financial Services for 2023, which, as you can see in this headline, there's a lot to unpack here about how financial services view their own personalization programs, where the opportunities for advancement are, and the potential threats that could keep them from capitalizing on those opportunities. But first, before we get into the research, let's get a little context as to where the industry is so that we're looking at the data with the right perspective. First things first, how important is digital personalization to the financial services industry? Well, with nearly half of customers moving to digital-centric banking solutions and more shifting away from traditional banking methods every day, it's clear that digital channels aren't going anywhere, especially when you consider the growing numbers of digitally native generations that are entering the workforce, buying homes, and starting families. But don't just take my word for it. Consumers agree that personalized experiences in banking are important. 50% wish their bank was more proactive about giving them relevant information, 65% agree that banks should make it easier to discover financial products, and 72% agree that product offers are more valuable when tailored to their personal needs and situation. So, with that context, you start to see that personalization is a big deal for financial institutions. But how are FIs actually prioritizing personalization? That's where we come in. Dynamic Yield surveyed 100 personalization stakeholders across the C-suite, senior managers, and middle managers, covering relevant business functions from FIs across the globe. And our results uncovered three major trends. First, personalization is a clear strategic North Star for financial institutions. This is good news because of the context that we just covered, and these numbers aren't just a narrow majority. Not even close. 86% of FIs stated that personalization is a clear, visible priority for the company and its overall digital strategy. Further, 92% of FIs share belief in personalization's value and have already allocated resources to support the practice internally. So, we know that FIs are on the right track. They recognize personalization's role in meeting consumer demands and staying competitive in the industry, and they're making the investments to develop their programs. This is a big step towards establishing a culture of personalization as well, where the organization is becoming fully aligned on the practice, and they're committed to placing it at the core of their customer experience work. But how has this belief translated into action? Well, here it gets a little more complicated. Trend number 2. FIs are struggling with the resources and processes that are necessary for meaningful implementation. Now, what does that mean? Well, for starters, belief doesn't manifest into meaningful implementation unless the right resources and processes are also prioritized. So, while many FIs have shared that they possess the belief, we're seeing that 63% of them either have limited resources or resources only available after making a clear business case. Now, that's important for any campaign, but if you have to do so on demand every time you launch a new campaign, well, that's going to do a number on your program's momentum and cohesion. The impacts of that can echo through the customer experiences that you do serve, making them less relevant. Now, we also learned that 83% of participating FIs reported that core elements of their website aren't available for testing or optimization. And another 83% said executive mandates can interrupt or take precedence over the existing roadmap. Now, this is a signal that FIs don't yet have the proper organizational alignment around strategy and resources. When all relevant stakeholders in the customer experience are on the same page, it reduces the amount of potentially gratuitous testing mandates that come from executives, as they'll already be bought in on the larger vision. So, with the right processes in place, they can start to reduce the hesitancy to explore particular areas of the site that were once considered to be off-limits. All relevant stakeholders means working across departments, across functions, and certainly in conjunction with senior leadership. Okay, moving on to trend number 3. We uncovered pretty big gaps in the perception of maturity between the C-suite and between middle managers. Now, these gaps threaten program development when it comes to culture, resources, and processes. This trend was evidenced by quite a few examples in the full report, more examples than we'll cover in this video, so if you'd like the full ungated report, be sure to check it out. But let's break this down a bit and see what we mean here. First, culture. The majority of both executives and middle managers agreed that personalization is important to the digital strategy. As you can see, with the majority of middle managers describing their organization as understanding the benefits and allocating resources to support personalization. But when it comes to how mature they perceive themselves to be, the C-suite was much more likely to report the highest levels that relate to their culture of personalization. Now, this is marked not only by belief, but ability to put personalization at the center of the customer journey. Take a look at this first stat. 42% of executives agreed that personalization is already a part of their organization's DNA. More than double the amount of middle managers who felt the same way at 19%. Further, 25% of middle managers expressed a more basic level of culture in that their organization hadn't yet orchestrated a true program or quantified the impact. Now, this was more than twice as high as the executives who took that position on the matter at 12%. So, why is this so important? Well, first and foremost, misalignment in this area poses a big threat to the program's future. Why? If executives believe that their organization has already achieved the highest levels of personalization and already baked it into the DNA of their digital strategy, it could stifle future investments or even lead to them being considered unnecessary. So, how do they bridge the gap? Well, first, it's important for all teams involved to be operating against the same strategy and to understand personalization's role in the program, because that's where all the necessary KPIs, resources like people, time, budget, and technology, and processes flow from. That's how they'll come to understand where the pain points and the opportunities for optimization are. Revisiting the vision with all the key stakeholders on a regular basis can help bridge this gap in understanding. Okay, next, resources. A continuation from the theme regarding culture, we find that executives view their resource situation as less challenging than middle managers. In the case of program ownership and direction, 28% of middle managers feel like they have a dedicated program owner with a team that supports personalization, versus 46% of the C-suite. When it comes to the actual resources available, 25% of middle managers feel like they're limited, with their teams working on other high-priority items. Now, this is in contrast to the 15% of executives who feel like the team is also under-resourced. So here's why it matters. Organizational structure and resources are the natural next step from turning personalization from a conceptual priority into action. But if the organizational structure is at odds with itself, the capacity of the program is going to be constrained. It's not hard to imagine a scenario with these gaps where senior leadership's expectation of personalization results is much higher than what the team can actually deliver. This has some serious long-term implications and could jeopardize the faith and commitment to the program. The situation can be alleviated with a roadmap that calls for consistency in campaign deployment and optimization, and by putting the resources in place to achieve that consistency. And in the effort to hitting a regular cadence, gaps in personnel, function, and other resources will reveal themselves and should be assessed as the program scales. But the cycle is never over, and the evaluation and reevaluation should be just as consistent as the program's campaign deployment and optimization strive to be. And the area with the largest discrepancies, processes. Our research brought to light three main areas where viewpoints differed: test ideation, data identification, and test locations. Now, for each of these areas, the C-suite took a much more optimistic stance than their colleagues in middle management. The data shows that the executives are wearing rose-colored glasses when it comes to where test ideas come from, middle managers are less bullish on the sources and amount of data that they're using, and it's widely felt that teams are restricted on where they can and do conduct tests, with a stronger emphasis from the middle managers. Now let's examine each of these. First up, test ideation. When faced with the statement, test ideas are a mix of anecdotal ideas and past performance data, 19% of middle managers felt like this was accurate to their programs, almost 5 times the number of executives who felt the same. Now, when we asked if FIs were completely data-driven in their approach to coming up with new test ideas, 54% of executives felt that they were, but just 28% of middle managers agreed. Now, there is something to be said about the collective knowledge that a company has about its digital properties and how that might be used to inform campaign ideas. But a strong testing and personalization strategy leverages as much hard data as possible. Relying on anecdotal ideas even early on in a program's development can limit revenue opportunities and thwart efforts in unlocking additional resources if leadership isn't able to see the returns they'd hoped from less informed experiments. Now, when it comes to data identification and integration, 44% of middle managers agreed that they have a full picture of personalization using data from various sources. This is in comparison to 73% of executives who felt the same. Now, further, 44% of middle managers also agreed that they've identified additional data sources but haven't yet baked them in. Now, This is in comparison to the remaining 27% of executives. So in the arena of data sources available for personalization, middle managers are pretty much split half and half over their program maturity, whereas executives are much more likely to view their programs as deeply mature. Now, it's a well-known fact that the more information a company has about its prospects and customers, the deeper the personalization opportunities. And FIs have a lot of consumer data. The trick is, how well can they integrate it into the program? It's a big challenge, and many struggle with it. Understanding the task's difficulty, complexity, and requirements might not be fully accessible except to those who are actually tasked with doing it. Finally, test locations. 19% of executives admitted there were multiple areas of their site that were off limits for testing and personalization, a number twice that of middle managers who said the same at 39%. Further, only 8% of middle managers feel like they have full autonomy to conduct tests across the website, which is a third of the amount of executives who feel the same at 23%. Just like data, the more locations you have to test, the better your results and impact of your personalization program. And unique regulations to the financial services industry might help to account for some of these areas that are off limits for testing. So in conclusion on processes, these gaps will hinder an FI's ability to deliver on personalization until they get on the same page. The expectations from the executives on the program's efficiency, success, speed, and overall ability to deliver results will be at odds with the reality of the situation. Now, when that happens, the program's perceived value plummets. The people actually doing the work will become increasingly frustrated, and ultimately, FIs won't realize the full potential impact and revenue gains of what personalization can bring. So, how can FIs bridge this gap? First, minimize executive mandates and focus on data-led test ideas. Establish the roadmap, stick to it. Avoid going off script, as this not only creates inconsistencies in the customer experience, but it thwarts the momentum of the program. Focus on the data and let the results lead you to the next step. Next, address technical difficulties in onboarding and integrating data. For the C-suite, who's often focused on strategy, there might be some blind spots here. And while they're certainly aware of the different sources and amount of data they have, they're not hands-on with the technical involvement of consolidating it into usable formats. One way to help alleviate this confusion is to err on the side of transparency for middle managers. They can, and should, raise any issues with data availability. Finally, standardize processes to instill trust in cross-site personalization. Significant limitations to available website testing areas can create disjointed customer experiences. It can dampen relevance when working to convert prospects into customers and customers into those of higher lifetime value. So what's the next step for financial institutions? Organizational alignment. The good news is that FIs have seen the writing on the wall. Consumers are using digital banking solutions, and they have identified personalization as a priority to deliver tailored offers that the customers find more valuable. But the gaps in perception between the different job levels is a big threat to how well they can actually deliver personalization and the potential value that it can bring. The goal is a unified vision, and that means everyone needs to be on the same page. Now, if you want to read the full report and see all the findings and stats behind the trends, you can check it out for free on Dynamic Yield's website. And if you'd like to take the survey that helped contribute to the research in this report, you can take the 16-question self-assessment and get a readout of your organization's maturity level. It takes less than 5 minutes, you get a detailed report, and additional resources to help you understand where you are, where you're going, and how to get there. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.